Hi everybody, this is Ben Sondgeroth from EdTech Teacher. So today's webinar, we're going to look at a topic that I feel very passionate about. And I think it's something that we don't maybe often engage our students in enough. And I know I was certainly guilty of that when I was teaching. And now with the availability of technology, especially on the iPad, well, we have we now have the ability to engage our students in the art of reflection, as I'm calling it, for this quick webinar. So what we're going to look at over the course of this webinar is how we can leverage technology to encourage our students to be reflective in their learning process. I am very passionate about this. I know that I use reflection a lot in my professional life now. I used it a lot as a teacher, and I know you use it a lot as a teacher. So I think it's something, and it's a skill that we can teach our students how to be effective at as well. So we're going to go through some stuff here about why we want to reflect. So I found this quote from John Dewey. I think it's really, really powerful. We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on our experience. And if we look at this from a teacher perspective, this is absolutely 100% the case. Or any experience when we're growing and we're learning as individuals. If I screw something up one time, I look back on that before I do it again and figure out how I'm going to make that process better. And what can I do to improve upon that process to not mess it up again. And that's reflection. We want to look at it. I build something, I make a wrong cut. I know now that I have to measure better the next time. So, this whole process of learning starts from reflecting on previous items that we've learned in the past. So this whole thing about learning from experience, I think, is really, or reflecting on experience, is really powerful. So that's where kind of our start of the day goes. And it kind of goes hand in hand with this next slide where we're talking about encouraging our students to build on their knowledge. So that reflection process, I think as a teacher, we look at this and we say, a better example, maybe even the one that I gave before, is I know this has happened to every single teacher out there, that you bring kids in for period one. Maybe you're teaching, I was a history teacher. So you have a US history class period one, and the lesson fails. Like, it is just a bomb. Like, something goes wrong. A piece, like if you're using technology, like a certain part of the app didn't work, or the app updated and you didn't know, and so it just went poorly. So what do you have to do? Well, you get 4 minutes, sometimes 3, of a passing period to switch that app up and change it up, or to change that lesson up, so that way when period 2 US history comes in, you don't have that same experience. You don't just go into the next lesson as a teacher and say, oh, well, it failed in period 1, so I'm going to let it fail again in period 2. We adapt, we build on that prior knowledge, and we reflect in that quick 3 or 4 minutes. That's all it takes for us as teachers, and a lot of times, to reflect back and say, what went wrong in the first lesson so I can adapt that so it doesn't go wrong in period 2. I don't know about you guys, but oftentimes when I was teaching, my lessons would be I would go the full 45, 50 minutes of the class period for period 1. But by the time I got done teaching it, say the third or fourth time in the day, all of a sudden my lesson was only taking like 35 or 40 minutes because I was getting better at it. We were covering content quicker. I was skipping the parts that didn't work from period 1, which also increased the challenge because I'm like, well, now what do I do with this extra 10 minutes of class? So it's something that we all do professionally. And I think we want to start making sure we're doing that with our students. Is how can we build on the knowledge? How can we reflect on what we've learned on the content before and grow with that as we move forward? And so we want to look at how we promote reflective classrooms in our, with our students. And I think a big thing comes with that. There's a great quote here from this book called Learning and Leading Habits of Mind. Teachers who promote reflective classrooms ensure that students are fully engaged in the process of making meaning. They organize instruction so that students are producers, not just the consumers of knowledge. And you've all probably had a EdTech teacher instructor come to your school, and we've talked about this process of consumption to creation. It's something that and VILS has, and Digital Promise, we've all been encouraging teachers to take students from the concept of just consuming the content and being the producer of the content. We have a lot of students that want to grow up and become YouTubers. Well, I had a great conversation out in Colorado Springs about that exact process, where students are used to consuming content from YouTube. They look at these people that are YouTubers that just build stuff on Minecraft and get paid for it. And they want to know how they can do that Well, it starts with understanding how to work the technology and how to create and how to give your consumers something that they want and becoming that producer of the content. And we can leverage that in the classroom. Where you can say, okay, kids, I, the teacher, am your consumer. You have to produce something for me that is of quality that I will want to consume. So they're not just sitting there taking in all of the facts that we give them as as a teacher. Instead, they're producing those facts. They're producing content in a way that makes sense. And that's promoting a reflective classroom. Okay, so we're really just making it meaningful learning and then looking back on that learning after they're done and saying, hey, how could we have maybe made this better? Or what could we have done to make sure that this is effective going forward? So I think that's a really powerful quote there from that book. Another quote that comes out from that book are, students may not understand the purpose of reflection or what they're supposed to reflect about. And I found this to be 100% true. I found this to be true even when I started teaching. If you remember back, at least in my student teaching experience, I had to do those 10, 12, 15-page lesson plans, which were completely unrealistic, right? Like, nobody actually does lesson plans that are that big and bulky anymore. But always at the end of those lesson plans, there was an area to reflect on the lesson. And you just wanted to say, why? Like, why do I need to reflect on this? Like, I got to that point in the lesson plan, I was always like, again, And it comes down to now looking back on that time period, like, reflection is really important. Like, that's really important as a teacher. Because I understand that, what we talked about already, the process of growth happens during that reflection period. And that's what my college professors were trying to get across to me. And I think we need to get that across to our same students. Like, they don't know why they're reflecting, but they also might not know how to reflect or what to reflect about. So structuring that for our students, I think, is really important. And explaining the purpose of that growth and what happens when we go back and we reflect on the project and how that can improve. Showing them how maybe they create a project one time in Shadow Puppet, and then the next time they use it, show them how it grew, show them how it became different, and talk to them that the fact that their first Shadow Puppet was maybe not as good as their second Shadow Puppet is because they understood the app better. They were able to use prior knowledge to create a better project or a better video on the second time, and that they were using reflection. They maybe just didn't know it. So teaching our kids what they're supposed to be specifically reflecting about is important too, because I can't just ask my students to say, hey, reflect back on how you got the answer in that math problem. They're probably just going to stare at you and say, I don't know. And, I got it because I went through the steps. And so we have to maybe guide them a little bit and teach them how to reflect, because reflection's a hard thing to kind of maybe master. And it's a skill that we need to learn. And along those same lines, maybe think about how you reflect. So when we're trying to teach our kids how we reflect or how to reflect, maybe we need to look at how do we reflect. So what are some ways that you reflect? Like, take just a second as you're maybe pause the webinar, think about it for a little bit. Just say, how do I reflect as a teacher? And I'll tell you, some of the ways I do are just going to be in this presentation with the technology skills that we do, but I take a lot of notes. I get done with a workshop, I go right into a note, either a notebook, sometimes handwritten notes. I go to Google Keep and I reflect back in there. I go to Google Docs maybe, or I go into this presentation that I just gave and I make some notes in the slide notes about how that activity went well, because I'm probably going to use that some other time with another school. And so I need to know what part of a workshop worked and what part of a workshop didn't. I need to take notes on that teacher, like those teachers that I worked with. Like, what did they understand, or what do I think I can grow with them the next time I come to that school or the next time I do that activity? You can do that with your students. We all do that. I know I had, when I was teaching, at the bottom of my lesson plans, even when I was, not just student teaching, but further on in my lesson plan book, I went back in and said, don't do that again. Like, that mess, that was bad, because I always looked at that lesson plan book the next year when I was building my lessons out. So just think about how you reflect and then how we can transfer that over to our students. Now we get to the answer, or the question of how can we help them? What is out there that we can do? How can we leverage both tech tools and maybe non-tech tools to get our students to the point where they're able to reflect? So my first big thing that I think is really powerful, and what I think can certainly help students with the reflection process, are these visible thinking routines from Harvard's Project Zero. These thinking routines structure students in a question process that will help them, in many cases, reflect on their learning or reflect on the topic at hand. It doesn't have to be that I completed a project and then I ask them to go back and reflect. You can start asking them to reflect through the process as they're building, and asking deeper, meaningful questions. And Project Zero, and you can see the link down there, visiblethinkingpz.org will get you there. And you can see all of these different thinking routines that encourage students to ask deeper, more meaningful questions about the content that they're studying. And I think that's a big part of driving kids to reflect, is giving them that structure that we talked about previously in order to teach them how to understand the reflection process. And I believe that Project Zero is a great way to do that. So here's one that is I think is really good for reflection, is think, pair, share. It's an activity that I'm sure most of you have done, but it can be considered a thinking routine that's going to be a part of reflection. Because as an example of how it works, if you're unfamiliar, I give a student an article to read in class about a topic. They read that, they write down some notes from it, maybe some guiding questions that I've given them about it. They then pair up with a partner next to them that read the same article, and they share their ideas. And I think it's great because they're articulating their thoughts, as this graphic says. But then also, now we're explaining the process. They're talking about what they just read. So they're not just reading it, answering questions, and then turning it into me. They're reading it, answering questions, pairing up, and going deeper into the content with a fellow student. And I think that's really powerful because that's part of the reflection process, is just talking about what you just read or what you just did with somebody else. That's when we learn a lot, is when we share ideas. And then also, so the partner might have something completely different to share, and a different take, and a different way of thinking about the content that they just did. So it's a really powerful activity, and this is just a great example of one visible thinking routine. Also, if you look up Mary Cantwell's website of design, or it's a DK Design Thinking, she's got these visualization graphics that are really, really great. She's got them all on a website. So if you look up Mary Cantwell visuals of thinking routines, she's going to have graphics just like this to be able to share with your students. Here's some other thinking routines that you might want to consider with that. So another one that's really good is the what makes you say that. I mean, that's perfect for a reflection piece, I think, because a student makes a viewpoint or picks a stance on a topic, and then they have to answer the question, well, what makes you say that? Like, why did you pick that? What makes you have that viewpoint? And then they have to go back and they have to reflect and think about how they came to that conclusion. So it's a nice way for them to say, like, I can come up with an answer, and I can say the South lost the Civil War, and then somebody says, well, what makes you say that? And then I have to go back and I have to figure out ways to support my opinion on that. So I'm reflecting back on the content that I maybe learned that told me that the South lost the Civil War, and furthering my opinion on that. Okay. Some of these other ones I used to think, but now I think, very much a great reflective routine. You can start off with asking the students at the start of a content subject, saying, well, what do you think about this? Like, what do you think about the Civil War? And they might say, well, I think the Civil War was fought because of slavery. And then you get done teaching the Civil War and you say, okay, we're going to use this thinking routine. We're going to reflect back now. Remember what you used to think. Well, now what do you think? After you've covered all the content, did that change? Like, go back, think about all the stuff we've covered. Does your opinion, did your position on that topic shift? And, you might find that a lot of kids are going to find that as a nice reflective routine. Connect, Extend, Challenge is another great one. Think, Puzzle, Explore, and then also See, Think, Wonder. All available on Project Zero's website. I encourage you guys to go and check those out. So what tools, those are just thinking routines. What tools can help with this process? Because I think that's really important now to kind of dive in and see how we can maybe leverage iPad apps and digital technology tools to help students with the reflective process. Those thinking routines can be incorporated into these tools. Like, that's important to know, that those thinking routines can be done on paper, very low tech, but then you can incorporate those into the tech tools that we're going to cover in the rest of this webinar to encourage kids to dig deeper in that content. Okay, so let's look at some of these tools. The first one, if you're a Google school, I like Google Slides for creating interactive workbooks or notebooks, I think, or digital portfolios even. I think these are really powerful ways to encourage kids to be reflective in the learning process. You could do the same thing in a PowerPoint or maybe in Microsoft OneNote, setting up these different areas, for reflection as they're going through different content. I'm just choosing Google Slides as kind of a universal tool, but you can certainly adapt the same concepts through digital interactive notebooks and workbooks using OneNote or PowerPoint as well. So let's look at a couple of examples here. Here's an example of a way to encourage video reflection. So maybe I'm flipping the classroom. I can put in a YouTube video on the right side of the slide for my students to watch and embed it right there, or a Google Drive video. If you've recorded something yourself and put it to Google Drive, you can embed that into the slide and then put a reflection structure note-taking activity on the left-hand side. So you can see I have prior knowledge. So maybe this is a video about the Cold War. I know this about the Cold War, and I put it, the students can write it in that column. But then after they watch the video, now they got those new ideas. They can reflect back and see how their structure has changed from prior knowledge to new ideas. And we're giving them a structured area. We're not just giving them a blank Google slide and saying, hey, reflect on here. Like, I've given them a specific note-taking activity or reflective activity to put next to the video that they're supposed to watch. So that can be a really, really great way to structure reflection inside of a Google slide. The next one here is a close reading example. And so students, we can give them a reading section here, like this speech from Lincoln. They have to read it. They can highlight the areas inside of Google Slides they can highlight the text right directly on the slide that they want to learn more about, or areas that we've told them to look for. And then we can look at adding just a text box at the bottom of the slide for them to reflect in. So they've read the speech, and now they're going to reflect directly underneath of that speech. We didn't send them out to another way. We didn't put them into a Google Doc. We didn't do anything. We just predefined a text box area for them to reflect in. So they read it and they reflected, and they didn't have to leave the same slide. I think that's a really cool, seamless way to encourage reflection based on a close reading activity. All right, so next, we're going to look at using version history in Google Apps. I think this is a really cool thing to look at, because what we can do is we can look back on how we edited a Google Doc. Okay, so if my students are writing in the writing process, they're engaged in the writing process, maybe they've peer reviewed it. Like you can see, this is an example of Avra suggesting edits to my paper or to my blog post. So what she can do is she goes in, or I go in, and I can see all these different ways that I changed my paper and how it evolved over time. So I can reflect back and say, wow, how did I get to that point? What spots did I miss? Where did I do that at? So I'm learning from my revisions that I made. So I get to the final copy, and then I go back and I look at the beginning, and I can learn about the writing process. So version history is really important. And then us as teachers, we can go in and look at the writing process that our students maybe went through to get to the end result. So I think it's really cool to kind of go back and use version history as a reflective tool as well. I mentioned it already as a way that I use it, but I think note-taking tools are really powerful as well for reflecting. Google Keep is great for that because it's in OneNote, both. They're available as mobile apps, but then also available on the web. Things sync across both tools. So using these note-taking tools for reflection, I think is really, really powerful as well, because you can go in, you can document, you can add pictures to both. So maybe my students completed a math activity on paper. They can take a picture of it. Both tools allow for audio, and so you could open up the audio feature, and the students can quickly record their reflection on how they got to their answer in that particular math problem. For their own reflection, they could share it then with you. All sorts of options. I really enjoy the ability that you can add in both of these tools, both images, audio, and text, to reflect back. It kind of gives you that you can run the gamut on all the different ways that you can reflect in the classroom, or ways you can express your reflection. And I think that's really, really powerful. So another great thing that we can do is we can use the native screencaster that's embedded in iOS 11 now to encourage our kids to screencast their reflections. So if you have students maybe making a video or an image in an app, they've doodled something in the notes, or they've used paper 53 to create some sort of image, or any real image at all. Maybe one that they discovered on the web that's part of the topic that they're doing. They can open up the screencasting recorder on their iPad and simply talk over and reflect on the process or reflect on that particular image and how it affects the content that you're currently studying. Like we just talked about with version history, what you could do is the students could open up that and record themselves talking about the process of writing. That's an option. You can also record a reflection on a website. So students are given a website, maybe a PDF or any other source that you have and you've provided them, they've read it, they can open up the screencasting tool on the iPad and start recording about the different spots that they learned about, like where they found the article to be powerful or where they found the website to be powerful. There's a lot of different options and ways you can use screencasting for reflection. I think it's a really cool thing. And then they create a video, they can share that video with you and you can listen to their reflection on that process. It can be something, maybe they made a Google slideshow or a PowerPoint on the iPad and they want to reflect over top of that, like how they got to the end result. All different options. I think screencasting is really, really, really cool. Okay, so another app, one that I really think is great, is called Recap. Okay, so this is called Recap. And Recap is both web and iPad based. It allows teachers it's very similar to Flipgrid, but kind of provides a different feel. And we're going to get to Flipgrid in a little bit. But it gives it a little bit different feel in that Recap is more student, like Flipgrid is more community based, where Recap allows students to kind of go on their own self-discovery journey. Okay, so you can ask students specific questions and they're going to see, you're going to see just their questions. They're not sharing them to a grid with the whole class can see them. It's much more individualized, but it's really cool in that you can ask students more than directly ask them 3, 4, 5 questions and they answer those questions using the video tool on their iPad to reflect on that. And they also have now recap journeys, and those are great because they send kids through a little mini journey about a topic that you create for them, where they have to answer questions along the way. You're providing them content. It's a nice way for them to reflect back and answer the questions that you have about the topic, but make them think deeper. So maybe partner these up with, say, a visible thinking routine or something along those lines as they're going through the content, and it can be a really cool, powerful tool. So I know, at least in the workshops, a lot of the workshops that your teachers have had, Shadow Puppet EDU has been a forestay of the VILS program so far. It's one of our favorite tools to show teachers. And it can be used as a great digital storytelling tool, but it can also be used as a great reflective tool, where you're asking students to build on and reflect on the content that they learned as an end result, maybe. And so if I show you here, this is a video of using Shadow Puppet as a reflective tool. And I'm going to just play a little bit for you here.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Mealy, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've learned this week at the iPad Summit. Padlet is a neat app that allows you to ask students questions, and it organizes their responses, their images, their information, similar to Pinterest or Instagram. Students are also able to see their peers' responses. Book Creator is a neat way to take notes or organize information. You can add images, links to websites or videos. It's a great way to store information, and it's also able to be uploaded to iBooks as a PDF.
So that was just a quick example of a teacher from a workshop that I led using Shadow Puppet as a reflection tool. So we went through a lot of different apps over the course of 3 days with this particular group of teachers. And they built a book in Book Creator centered around all the different things that we covered throughout the course of those 3 days. And it was a lot of fun because then at the end, you can see she took screenshots of each one of her pages of her book. And you could do this with Google Slides or PowerPoint or anything like that, really any tool that would allow your kids to create a page or one page. And then you drop those into Shadow Puppet and then they reflect back both using the video or the image of their topic, but then also the audio of it. So they get to verbally reflect and they get to use their words to express their learning, which I think can be even more powerful than, say, just writing something down on a piece of paper. So Shadow Puppet, with its ability to kind of structure things out in a sort of slide-by-slide level and then use audio to record over top of it, I think is a really cool way to engage your kids in the reflective process. Another great video tool that many of you have probably been exposed to, but we want to just go over it again in case you didn't get a chance to look at it, is Flipgrid. I'm just going to highlight that Flipgrid is an amazing tool for video reflection. I just, it has been a hit with everybody that we've shown. Everybody's getting Flipgrid fever when they look at it, and it's something to maybe remind you that it's there if you haven't used it in a while. And Flipgrid, if you recall, allows your students to use audio and video to reflect on a topic. So they're using the iPad camera to record themselves or somebody else reflecting on a question that you pose to the group. And they simply hit the big green plus button, they add it, and then you as a teacher can moderate those when they go to the grid, or your students can just post right to the grid, and then they can click and learn from everybody else. I think that's part of the reflection process too, is learning from other people. And Flipgrid allows you to do that almost better than any other app, because I can click on everybody else in my grid's story and their Flipgrid that they've posted, and I can listen to it and I can learn how their perspective is done. So I know we talked about like think, pair, share and all of those activities. You can do that inside of Flipgrid. And remember, it's that very social media type feel to connect to students, whether that be the liking feature or having the views, or having that interactiveness of taking the selfie as they talk. It can be really, really powerful, I think. So I wanted to make sure that we do highlight Flipgrid as another awesome reflective tool in the classroom. And then another one that we've been showing to some schools, we've had the opportunity to, is Opinion Podcast. And if you've had this with an instructor, you know that we've talked about using Opinion Podcast to create short podcasts, but it can also be used as a much more informal audio reflection tool, where you're just getting audio. Students can go into Opinion, hit the big red button in the top left-hand corner, and start recording their reflection on the process that they just undertook. And then they can share it with you directly through like Google Classroom or through OneDrive or any other way, collect it through a Padlet wall. There's all sorts of ways you can collect it. But I think this gives you a nice, quick way to gather student audio reflection. Like we've done a lot of video tools up until this point, so I wanted to include an audio tool as well, because sometimes just simply talking and not having to worry about the camera being on you is a powerful way to reflect and use audio in the reflection process. All right, so that sums up our webinar, and I had to throw in a picture of the baby boy in there at the end, Ryder. But if you have any questions about this moving forward, feel free to reach out to me, Ben at edtechteacher.org. I'm happy to talk about the reflective process with you. And follow me on Twitter at Mr._Sondgeroth. If you have any questions at all, please reach out. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you become better at engaging your students and leveraging the technology in the classroom. So thank you very much for listening to this webinar. I hope you picked up some fun tidbits about the reflective process. And have a great rest of the day.